I'm in a good mood tonight, so I'm going to do one more. This one was it's a reprint from again Robert Whiting's Japan. You can find it at robertwhiting.substack.com. This one is called Time Machine Language Lesson. It was this story originally appeared in the Japanese newspaper, the Yukan Fuji, in 2014, so 9 years ago. Yukan Fuji is I think you'd call it a weekly, a tabloid. One thing in Japan, like tabloids back home, whether in the UK or the US, they may have big bosomed women and stuff like that in sports pages. But one thing that is different is the tabloids in Japan or magazines are often the source of really, really, really good political information. Often it's very accurate. And I don't know now, but in the past, you would have Japanese newspaper reporters who are really restricted from writing what they would like to do because they have these press clubs, a company or government agency. And if you start writing stuff that you're not supposed to write about, they don't like it, then they will just blackball you. So some of these frustrated reporters who had just tons of information would write under a pseudonym, and you get the real thing. Anyways, Bob Still, age 81, he writes, his column appears in Japanese every Tuesday. It's called the Sakura Report. And sometimes the translated version comes out and vice versa. Anyways, let me start. Again, this is called Language Lesson. Tokyo. MLB clubhouses are full of bravado and machoism, and so they are not the most diplomatically correct places in the world. Insults are freely exchanged, as are practical jokes. There is, however, a line that you should not cross, and New York Mets pitching coach Dan Warthen discovered that recently when he made a crude joke to Daisuke Matsuzaka's interpreter, Jeff Cutler, a 30-year-old American who's half Japanese and has Asian features. Warthen then suddenly found himself the target of criticism in the American media. In a poor attempt at humor, Warthen had called Cutler Chinaman, a word that is considered an ethnic slur by many Chinese Americans, during a conversation on March 11th at the Mets camp. The next day, Warthen saw fit to apologize to Cutler in the Mets locker room in Port St. Lucie, Florida. "Sorry I called you Chinaman yesterday," Warthen was quoted as saying. "I didn't mean to insinuate. I know you're not Chinese." "It's okay," Cutler replied. Warthen then paused and said, "I thought it was a pretty good joke, though," before walking away. Cutler was not offended by Warthen's remark, although it was not entirely clear that he understood the intended humor, as you, the reader, may not either. However, standing nearby to Warthen's awkward apology was a Chinese-American reporter for the Wall Street Journal named Stu Wu, and he most certainly was offended, even though Warthen was talking to somebody else and not him. In fact, Wu found Warthen's remarks so insulting that he wrote an article about it in his newspaper entitled, "In the Mets Locker Room, an Old Slur Resurfaces." And in it, he described what the Mets pitching coach had said to Matsuzaka's interpreter, and essentially accused Warthen of racism. The article got a great deal of attention in the American media. Okay. The problem for Wu and other Chinese Americans was that the term Chinaman reflected an age-old prejudice white America once had towards Chinese immigrants. Historically, Chinaman was a neutral compound word, similar to Englishman or Irishman. But it began to take on negative connotations in the 19th century when many Chinese immigrants went to work in the American West, working on building the Intercontinental Railway, among other things, and suffered great discrimination. Chinese laborers did most of the work, but were not credited for it in the history books, and indeed don't even appear in the famous photographs of the completion of the Great Trans-America Railway. Okay, well, Chinese people will tell you that the words come from chink, a derogatory slang word for people from China, and that it is in the same category of insult as Jap is to Japanese. and it's a word that is almost never used now, except by out-of-touch, older educated individuals in America, and also in Maximura from time to time, such as you might find on the coaching staff of a professional big league club. Please keep in mind that professional baseball players in the United States are the least educated of any professional sports, and many athletes could not even point to China on a map. Many NFL and NBA players, by contrast, have four-year college degrees, earned or not. As a result of Wu's article, Warthen was forced to issue a public apology. "I apologize for the thoughtless remarks that I made yesterday in the clubhouse," said Warthen in an official statement. "They were a poor attempt at humor, but they were wrong and inappropriate in any setting. I am very sorry." Moreover, the Mets GM Sandy Alderson felt the matter so grave that he saw fit to apologize as well. "On behalf of the entire organization, I apologize for the insensitive remarks made by one of our staff members. The remarks were offensive and inappropriate, and the organization is very sorry." This may be difficult for some in Japan to understand, but Wu had a perfect right to protest. The pitching coach was in a position of power, higher on the totem pole than the interpreter or the reporter. His behavior could be construed as an abuse of power. Wu could have sued the Mets, had he so wanted, for their pitching coach's display of what clearly appeared to be bigotry. This is reminiscent of an earlier incident involving Mets executive Bill Singer, who was once fired for making an ethnic slur against then LA Dodgers assistant GM Kim Ng at a baseball convention and mocked her Chinese heritage with a fake accent. He blamed alcohol and painkillers. Wow, that's kind of familiar. Somebody remind me where that similar story might come from. Okay. This incident should tell you something about the difference between Japan and America. There are minority groups in Japan who suffer discrimination and verbal harassment from time to time. Former Tokyo Governor Shintaro Ishihara was quite famous in that regard with his remarks about Sangokujin, third country nationals, a derisive term used for Koreans in Japan after World War II, and other minorities. But there is little recourse for those who feel victimized. The rules of society are perhaps stricter in the US than they are in Japan on this score. Roughly 1/3 of the US population of over 300 million is non-white, and the number is growing. In California, non-whites are in the majority. There are so many diverse minority groups that there are laws and political lobbies to protect them, and a legal apparatus consisting of an army of lawyers to enforce them. There are over 1.2 million lawyers in the United States, which is about 28 times the number of attorneys in Japan. Lawyers in lawsuits constitute the American way of protecting one's rights. Of course, it is worth mentioning that the only person offended in the Mets Chinaman incident was the person who was not even involved in the conversation or even within earshot of the original joke. Warthen had already made his personal spoken man-to-man apology, and that might have been the end of it right there. Cutler didn't care. Neither did Matsuzaka, who freely said as much to anyone who asked him. In fact, Mets pitcher John Nisei lambasted Wu for publishing a private remark in Mets clubhouse, implying that Wu might have a difficult time covering the Mets this year. But that likely won't change anything. Stuart Wu is no doubt a big hero today to the nearly 4 million Chinese people living in the U.S., just as a Japanese reporter who called out an American player using the word "dap" would be amongst Japanese living in the States. There are two things to take away from the story. One is that minority rights are strictly protected. The other is that in America, being a victim is a big industry. There are a great many people in American society looking to be offended so that they can complain about it and draw some attention to themselves, and perhaps, in some cases, file a lawsuit, make some financial gain out of it. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution may guarantee free speech, but that doesn't mean you can actually say anything that you want. Political correctness rules the day. The end. Oh, wait, there's more. Note, adding insult to injury was the fact that Warthen referred to a Japanese American as Chinese, expressing the tendency of many unsophisticated Americans who tend to view all Asians as one. Now that is the end. Okay, I hope you enjoyed it. And again, that was from 2014, so like 9 years ago. Thanks for listening. And if you have any requests, put them in the comments below. Okay?